Thanks again, Jay. All right, so we're going to go to the panel discussion as we discuss, and I'll moderate it. First, I'll explain how we're going to do this. Initially, we're going to invite each of the panelists to give us a brief overview, personal intro. We deferred that from the beginning. We're going to ask, in addition to personal, excuse me, we'll go through the intros. We're going to ask each of the panelists to answer, an initial question. I will pose that. Once we've been around the table twice in that manner, intros, one question each, then we're going to open it up to the audience. We're going to invite all of you folks to ask questions. And again, I'll continue to moderate it. We'll ask questions. We'll invite you to direct your question at one of the panelists. If you don't care, we'll ask the panelists to raise their hand if they have a preference. But we'll work that. We'll work the the questions through an effective process that way. So with that, let me invite each panel member, and I'm going to ask, we'll go from left to right. We'll start with Kurtis, and we'll go to Vicky, and then to Jay. And so let's begin. Kurtis, please give us a personal background, and what is your interest in being on this panel?
Sure, thank you. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to stretch. You guys can join me if you want to, just for a second. My name is Kurtis Knapp. I'm an assistant director at the Office of Systems Integration. Carlos referenced our department a couple of times. Specifically, my day job is I'm director of the Electronic Benefit Transfer project in California, and that's what's called the California Advantage card that every CalWORKS and food stamp recipient in California, approximately 2 million individuals, that use those cards to access cash and food stamp benefits at retailers and ATMs. Xerox is our contractor. We have a vendor relationship with them. My objective and my delight to be on the panel is that for the last 20 years or more than 2 decades, every day when I come to work, I have a vendor relationship. Let me say clearly that I fully support and love the private-public partnership that California has in just numerous areas through departments and agencies in California. We both bring something a little bit different to the table, and hopefully in our panel discussion we'll have some of that discussions on our cultures might be a little different. Our objectives might be a little bit different in terms of one's profit-driven, one's a little more altruistic, if you will. In my regard, we're trying to meet the needs of clients that are in a bad situation and need some opportunity. And so the better vendor relationship that I can have, the better I ultimately can serve the clients of California. And significantly, and I don't know what departments are represented here, I have a sponsor. It's the California Department of Social Services, and they are really the ones responsible for the final client interaction. We're there to support them. I'm on the IT side. Just a little bit of history and it served me well. Before I joined public service, I came out of the private sector. I worked for PepsiCo for almost 15 years, and that is a very profit-driven environment, if you will, very sales-directed, and so I got a flavor of that. And then I also worked for the County of Madera for about 5 years. Vicky and I were partners there, and much of the work that we do now is serving our counties because they actually the benefits. And now that I'm with the state, so I have a little bit of a flavor from all those, and hopefully we'll be able to contribute in our panel discussions some things with you. So thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, Kurtis. Okay, move to Vicky Sady. Vicky.
I'm also going to stand up. I'm Vicky Sady. I'm currently the Deputy Director of the California Medicaid Information System. And what we do is we process all the claims for the beneficiaries who receive services at hospitals, pharmacies, or with your doctor. I call it, we are in a healthcare revolution. with Obamacare and Affordable Care Act, and all the things that are happening within healthcare, I think it's very, very important that we're in sync with our vendors, right? So Xerox is also my vendor, and we do have a very good relationship with them. But it didn't start out that way, right? I mean, it takes time to build that, and I think it's very important to understand the day that you sign your contract with your vendor, you're almost at odds. They're coming at it from a different perspective than you are. They still are driven by profit, right? And we are not. And so to understand that going in and understanding and coming to a point in place where you're in alignment with your vendor and understanding what it is that they're trying to accomplish, at the same time understanding what the state needs to do to be able to manage that contract and that vendor, I think is very important. And I think the framework that was provided today is absolutely in what Jay says, it's something that we all use, maybe not to the nth degree, but we all have pieces and parts of that we use to manage our vendor. And I think that, if you don't have that relationship with your vendor, your project is going to be very, very difficult and probably will be one of those that fails, as they were describing downstairs. So I'm very excited to hear what questions you have and what knowledge I can impart to you, but I'm very excited about this. I started out as a project director and somehow ended up as a deputy director. I don't know how that happened, actually, but I miss being in the weeds of getting the job done. But it also puts me into a place where I'm doing a lot of monitoring and controlling and having that relationship with the vendor that I also find very exciting. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad you chose to join us this morning.
Thank you, Vicky. Jay.
Well, Vicky is the friend that we need to have. Nick is actually a sponsorship. Quick response. Well, I think I talked too much because I come from private sector as well. I just joined state a couple of years ago. So I have a both side experience, and one thing I always think about a partnership and a project manager, I always use the analogy, when you hire someone to fix your kitchen, you need to know, you probably already want to do, I want to know if this contract done this before, what I wanted to do, and when he show up, he finish something, it's not follow the plan, what I should do. That kind of analogy, the project, state government, we needed to take ownership. We cannot leave that to the vendor. Vendor can do the best they could, but we are the owner. If we don't have that mentality, and once the crisis happen or something happen, we are the one who will hold the bucket at the last minute, and we'll be the one to get the blame about it. So I always like say, if the project is between us, Xerox, doesn't matter, IBM, we should always take ownership to be responsible. Well, the vendor will be responsible for their part, but we are the owner of our own project. I just want to kind of emphasize that. That way, everything is much easier. You cannot say, he didn't do that, he didn't do that. Just like home kitchen, you are the one own everything. Yeah, thank you.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Jay. All right, so as I mentioned, the next round, I'll pose a question to each of the panelists. We'll go in the same order again. Simplifies it for me. So Kurtis, we mentioned several times the concepts of execution and trust. We didn't necessarily expand on those. Could you give us your perspective on the importance and maybe how to make practical, and realistic practices of execution and trust?
Sure. What we hope to impart a little bit today is, Vicky and I, we haven't worked together for more than a decade, but I know her philosophy, she knows mine. We're kind of like boots on the ground type of folks. We're very pragmatic, and so if you can walk away with just a couple of things today, and you've got a handout, so that is going to give you some guidance. But the execution and the trust go together, and so let me give you some examples. And what's the responsibility of trust? The responsibility of trust is for you, and most of us are at a level where you're managing folks. It's absolutely imperative that you have a trustful relationship with your vendor, and it should start early, without questions. And and I'm talking about, we're equals in terms of our goals and our expectations and what we hope to achieve with these very big projects. And as Carlos had mentioned this morning, you know, we either reap the benefits of a positive results, or we reap the benefits of press being out there if we're not successful together. And so we have to be able to develop that trust, if you will. You got to walk the walk, okay? You got to build that trust early on, and how can you do that? Sometimes you do it by reputation. Somebody may not even know Kurt personally, but they know somebody who knows Kurt. And that first impression is, do you know Vicky? Do you know Kurt? Do you know Scott? Do you know? And if you haven't developed trust with that other person through reputation, you're starting on the back side. You can redeem and you can build trust, but it takes, you know, a lot more, if you will. Let me say this about the vendor relationship a little bit. And I'm in a presentation this afternoon, and we're going to talk a little bit about culture. Is we all have our own objectives, if you will, right? And what I have found in the vendor community, and typically I really like my vendor relationships, and I've had good relationships with them, but it's not necessarily always what they say, especially in a crisis or a risk and an issue where an issue's come up. It's not what they say, it's what they don't say. And to me, that can be as distrustful as telling you something that's inaccurate. So you're working through an issue and you say, gosh, you know, we've got a problem with our software, we're having some difficulties, performance is not what we expect. What do you think it is? And some will flat out tell you what it is. Some will tell you something that's not it, while they're in the back room trying to fix it. But it's those that don't tell you exactly what's going on, and so you have a difficult time, making decisions. Remember that in a vendor relationship, we're always working in clearly. This is as simple as you can get: scope, schedule, and cost. And those are the three things that you continually want to be transparent, and you want your vendor to be upfront with those things so that you know where you're at any given time. I could probably talk for a half a day on the trust issue as it applies to execution. They need to walk the walk. You need to set early expectations. And one last comment, and it's a responsibility on both sides. I might have a great, trustful, transparent relationship with my peer. Let's say it's Tom or it's Scott, and I have a great peer relationship with them, and I have built trust. It's important that I have trust of their staff, and it's important that I have trust with their executive team. It's important for me to know that if Scott or Tom will take the same conversation we have and be able to project that with their executive team, and it's not just almost the same, it's exactly the same. So you can do that orientation, and the state has that same obligation. If I have folks that are working on my team, I need to know that they're trustful, and I know that my sponsor is being equally trustful. So some comments about trust and execution.
Thank you, Kurtis.
Can I add on to that?
You may.
So, that Kurt brings up a very good point, right, about our staff. And I think that, if I ask people to raise hands about, is the staff in your boat, right? Is everybody that works for you in your boat to get there? So I think that, it's very important that we make sure that and I'm going to go into the question, right, about performance. Right, about performance measurements, because I think the way that you get your staff in your boat is that you bring them to the table and you identify what your entrance and exit criteria is for what it is that you're trying to accomplish, so that they're a part of that. And as you go through that and you meet those commitments, and the vendor continues to meet those commitments, then the staff will come along with you, right? Because it's very, very important. But it doesn't start out where your staff is in your boat. It doesn't start out where your relationships with your vendor are very strong. It doesn't start there. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of understanding and coming to common ground for us to be able to manage these large IT projects.
My last comment, sorry, Ruben,
I know.
I want to get this one. If you guys have not seen, it's been around for years and years and years, and it's great for staff. If you have never seen the Road to Abilene, Okay, you can YouTube, you can do a YouTube, all right? Our team uses that thing for 6 years. When we're in a group meeting, and just watch it, and then if you want to send me an email with your comments on, number one, it's entertaining. It's very short, and it speaks to, from a trust perspective, it speaks to honesty that portrays into trust. So if you haven't seen it, it's more than worthwhile. The Road to Abilene.
Okay, thanks, Kurt. So Vicky, let me just ask a clarifying question with regard to your comments. So oftentimes those metrics are not oftentimes. Typically, they're initially presented to us in the commitment document, the contract, whatever it is. So what about in this relationship as you described it, those that aren't necessarily there? Any perspective on that?
Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm referring to, right? There's a contract that drives that relationship to a lot of degree. But if you're managing just by your contract, you, in my opinion, you are not going to be successful. And so it's about finding out from a day-to-day perspective of what it is that you need at any given time to be successful, and measuring, right, that entrance and exit criteria so that everybody's working to the same goal and the same commonality, so that you don't get into, or when you do get into those, you didn't do this or we didn't do that. We say, pull out the document. What did we agree to, right? And so it helps drive that. It helps build the trust. And again, I'll just say, if you are managing to your contract, and that's the only way that you're managing your project, you are setting yourselves up to fail. There's more to this, and it's that communication, and it's that vendor relationship that you have to build that's outside of that contract. That contract is, to me, like that framework and that guiding principle of, to ensure that I'm providing the best service to the state of California, but it's not what allows a project to be successful.
Good, thank you, Vicky. Okay, just bend that down a little. Okay, Jay. So Scott showed us a slide which was titled segmentation. Lower left was commodity, upper right partnership. So what are indicators that a vendor is going to display showing that that vendor is trying to get to that upper right long-term partnership?
I would say strategic partnership, that should be direction. I'm looking for vendor actually to not just sell me one time. I'm looking for long-term partnership. This is very important. I have quite a few cases. First of all, government operate a little bit different from private. Sometimes at crunch time, the last minute, you have some surplus money you have to spend. You need a vendor say, I need this by tomorrow. I need to procure $500,000 network. But I have to tell vendor, don't sell something just from your junkyard or something. This is a part of my strategic plan. This is the first piece we're going to do. So I share this with the vendor. This is my goal. This is just not something I'm gonna spend, and that's for the sake of spending. So I have very good relationship with few vendors. They can deliver this kind of a service. And when we have next year, we have a budget, you can tell what he delivered to you is like a Lego puzzle. You can build up on instead of scratch over and to procure again. So this the relationship I think is headed to the corner, the upright corner, Scott, in your framework. We're looking for long-term partnership. We can build and we can contribute, and actually we can generate substantial value.
Okay, excellent, thanks. Okay, so back to just kind of the logistics. So we've completed two intros, round one intros, round two, initial questions. So now we're going to open it up. And so before everybody raises their hand, which we're going to do in a second, Scott's going to be the adjudicator about who gets their hands up first. So Scott, look sharp. Tiebreaker. So, okay, so now please, audience, any questions for our panel?
I think Gopal mentioned one of the things is ineffective testing and quality. And so we talk about project management, quality management, defining your exit and entry criteria, entry and exit criteria, probably through your DEDs, something like that. Is that where you're heading? Vicky?
Yes,
I'm trying to get
absolutely,
clarification on
yes.
that. Okay.
Yep. So the question is, you know, where do you document those entrance and exit criteria? And that is through your documents, right? Your DEDs, which are your design documents, or on your test plans, on your test documents. So we have those agreements built into each one of our deliverables, so that we know what we're saying is to start, you must have this much, and to finish, you must have this much, and we know what that is.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What is the most effective way to communicate those DEDs? So I think I mentioned earlier, a lot of times we do a lot of documentation exercises, but I'd like to understand how your preference for communicating those to educate the group on what the expectations are around those.
So I'll start. So what we do is we have all the players at the table to start with who are building what those entrance and exit criteria is. And what we haven't really talked about, I think, is making sure that the business is at the table as well, right? We talk about that these are business initiatives, but as IT folks, we sometimes forget about the business side. So we start at the very beginning of the project making sure that the business is involved and that they are part of the decision making. It is their responsibility then to go back to their respective units to provide that communication. In addition to that, we do quarterly briefings for the whole department. So anybody who wants to come can come, and we do updates about what it is. I'm very, very cautious about not doing something and allow it to become shelfware. So everything we do has to have a purpose, and it has to be used to meet an objective, not that it's just shelfware, including our project management plans. That's how we manage our projects, is through those plans. Does that answer your question?
Yes, please.
So,
Kurtis, do you want to add
yeah,
to
so,
this? Okay.
so, because that's an essential success criteria, and I said I can be very simplistic sometimes, but take it home or debate it or throw it away or whatever you want. Issues we have with when we typically have issues in our vendor relationship, it's either schedule, scope, or cost, okay? So your DEDs would be in the scope arena. The better job you can do in defining those and recognizing that you are not going to hit those 100%. All right, so and that's where Vicky talks about the exit strategy, if you will. And every one of our major implementations statewide, the big projects is always, and they bleed into each other, okay? So you have the scope issue. Where does it bleed into? It can maybe not meeting the business needs. In our regard, we have 58 counties and 3 consortia that we have these very substantial interfaces, if you will. And if we don't get those right, okay, it causes them a lot of problems, and the downstream effect is with our clients that get benefits posted to their accounts. So, but it also bleeds into the cost. You know, cost can be pure dollars in a contract. In a vendor relationship, I signed $1 million contract. I feel like I met that obligation. You're wanting additional things that are a product of not clear DEDs, if you will. And so, you know, everybody knows what a work authorization is, and then there you get into the rub, right? So one is, it's important to have that good, honest, transparent relationship with your vendor, because you're gonna be times when you're at the table and you're at odds. And the better relationship you have, the better ability you have to resolve those issues.
Okay, excellent. Jay?
I didn't go to the detail or CAD system testing. It's very sophisticated testing, at least 200 or more tests for each milestone. And fortunately, all the test cases were built from our CAD modernization project. So DPR basically leveraged that same test cases, and it is very, very large quantity of testing cases, 200 at least. One thing I want to add to Vicky is it's very important to have a business to participate, to validate your business test cases and do the acceptance testing. Because we had an issue, because our CAD system is 99.8%. We're trying to reach 99.9% availability. It's very, very high. So at one time, there is a talking about how can we define uptime, downtime? This is the key. So from technology point of view, the vendor say, well, the server is running, 80% of function is running, and it should say partially up. But business, they don't really care on the server side. If the police in the car, they cannot connect to you, that's maybe just 1% of the function, but if they cannot connect to you, it is downtime. So that's the key. You said business needed to be there. IT, we can sit in our office, just make that decision, but that's not a good decision. We need a business to make the final decision.
And if I can just point that back to the context of the framework, and again, not to say it is the framework, but to put it in context, where is that made visible to all the parties? The participation and the engagement of the business stakeholder. It comes in a number of the places we show. It comes in the interaction model. It comes in the communication and forum framework that Scott discussed, and it comes in the roles and responsibilities. It comes in that matrix I showed with the frequency contacts, right? It puts the responsibility on a person or persons, to hold that role, to fulfill the kinds of responsibilities that the panel has just described, right? And making that visible so that everybody knows that, whether it's in the RASCI chart, whether it's in the frequency contact diagram, whether it's in the forum model, right? We know specifically, right? This person's on point to be that stakeholder. Right?
And so where I saw it in the framework right away was that guiding principles, right? The second one was, I think it says, separates and allows focus on critical business functions by the right experts, right? That's where I thought of right away, right? You've got to bring the business to the table. It's got to be in your guiding principles that the business is part of your project team.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, another question from the audience. Oh, Scott, are you?
Still one right there.
No, we'll go back.
Go ahead.
So from your experience, the system development methodology, so we all talked about project management, but within that, there's another methodology which is very key to system development methodology. So sometimes organizations have their own methodology, and the vendor, they bring their own methodology, right? Which is better? Which is better in your experience to go?
You want to answer that, Jay?
Okay, well, I would say the methodology, at least you need to have one, right? So you have to have some model to work on. And which one is better really depends on the project, depends on the scope, depends how sophisticated. I would say in general, doesn't matter is a software project PM, the waterfall was primarily for software, but it's kind of a overlap to PM. The waterfall is slowly die down in the industry. It is agile, increment, phase out methodology is more popular. That's why Facebook, Google, they can release 400 versions every year. They can do 3 releases a day. They all use agile. I think for government, state government, we are moving the same direction. If you look at the DGS website, we have a new IT large procurement recommendation study report, which shows in the future we need a modularized large project or smaller one. Instead of one vendor, we need a multiple vendor to work on a large project. Like you build the Lego pieces, increment approach. That all based on agile methodology. It's applied for both software and PM.
Jerry, I think that's a good question. A couple of things. The state has a reputation of procurement sometimes and the development efforts going on for a long period of time. Embarrassed to even say that. Okay, long period of time. My position is, to answer your question specifically, the reason we have a vendor relationship is because we hope to empower and bring the best to the state. We expect that they are, through research and development, from being out into the open community, they know what's going on and they're bringing their recommendations. So my answer would be to you, I'm going to listen to them attentively, and then, okay, I'm going to make my decision what meets the state's best needs. But that's certainly the reason we have a strong vendor relationship and on these big projects, because we expect that they're experts.
And I think you have to keep in mind, right? The contract was written like 5 years ago, right? By the time you get like where you're implementing, the contract is old. And so you have to be open-minded enough to look at what Kurt's talking about, right? Look at all points of view and figure out which is the best path forward for your project or for whatever it is you're working on, right? Continuous process improvement is huge because these contracts, again, were written so long ago. So I think it's all about continuous process improvement and about listening to one another and coming to a common understanding of what the best path forward is to achieve your goals.
Okay, good. Next
Another
question.
one back there, and then
We had
we'll
a
go
number.
over here. I saw
Okay.
my hand up.
I have a question, based on the gentleman that says about bringing a vendor into the state. But you forget that also the state is lack of training and education in the core of the state. So how do you know that we are expert in listening to the vendor when we don't have the training and adequate expertise in a lot of departments? I mean, your department may be successful, but the majority of the state department has lack of project management skills, the IT profession especially. There's no training for them to be up to par with the vendor to understand what's going on. I mean, you can bring the vendor in, but like Jay said, that we have to take ownership. It's very difficult to take ownership when the state do not provide the IT professional or even the project management team to understand within the business process. I mean, that's what I think the state is lacking on, a lot.
I think that's a great question and a comment, and if we could just make incremental improvements if we can. I think Carlos talked about, because I've had some staff go, Carlos talked about actually 5 or 6 new initiatives from Caltech that for all levels of staff within California state folks can start to attend. Now, whether or not you get approval for those things is a separate issue. But I could tell you I've had staff go to those. A couple of them have been better than we expected, so at least there is an opportunity.
Excellent.
Yes, that. I want to say that's the deputy director of California Technology Department. That's the question for her.
Chris?
Yeah. Yes.
Happy to talk about that, but if you're in the morning session, we actually started this Project Academy series where we talk about executive sponsorship, we talk about business requirements, we talk about organizational change management. And right now, those are free trainings, and I think Carlos is trying to do that because there has been, budget issues in terms of getting training approved, now you have to get a contract, it's very laborious now, I have no idea. But, so we're really trying to do our part, and also, the managers really do have to support their staff on all levels. I mean, I like what Vicky said earlier about if you manage to the contract, you're dead in the water. That is so true, because you have to grow your staff so they can take a step back, look at that contract, and look at that deliverable, but talk to the sponsor, talk to the project manager if you're aligning staff, to understand what that is. Because it is, contracts are black and white, but in California projects, you operate in the gray area. There's a lot of gray, and you have to have a strong change management system where you agree to disagree, or you agree and you document so you can go forward with your project.
And I'd just like to add to that and give a plug to ITLA 21. They recently did a presentation on organizational change and business process reengineering. That is huge, right? To get our staff to do as-is documentation so that they can actually learn the business that they're currently doing. And so, I don't know where that documentation is going to reside, but You know, that's what we need to do is get some of those individuals out talking to the departments that are not allowed to go to training or don't have the funds to go to training, because there's a lot of good documentation out there that we have to go out and search for ourselves to be able to educate ourselves as we go through this process.
Excellent. So we're actually getting very close to you know, our wind down time here. Let's take one more question really quickly. Scott?
You were, go ahead.
I guess it's just a follow-up to what you're saying about the training, and there is a portal that allows that. But I think you see, as soon as the communication goes out, availability of those classes are gone within hours. So it just shows that the need is really there. So there is a tool, but it's not available to everybody. And there's a way to that section of the ground and so forth, I think that creates that gap.
So I think we're actually officially at the end. However, I'm sure the panelists, as well as Scott and I, are happy to stay and answer additional questions as long as you would like. But let's do our official wrap. So Scott and I again thank the state for giving us the opportunity to present and share with you our model. We also thank our panelists, Kurt, Vicky, and Jay twice for his case study. So this was a lot of fun for us. Hope the panel as well, and thank you all for your attention and participation.
Thank you for coming.
Vicky's gonna do it, Carl. Thank you.